Hello, welcome back to my studio. Today it's the turn of watercolor. I'm going to be showing you my favorite painting kit and then finishing off with a little demonstration to show you how I put it all together. So keep watching and see what you can find out about painting in watercolor. Now when it comes to painting materials, I like to try and keep things simple. It makes things easier when you're painting and it also saves you some money. So painting brushes. My favorite painting brushes are these. Starting off with a cat's tongue brush. You can see the distinctive shape and it comes to a nice point when wet and holds a lot of water. It's made by Raphael, a French company, and very good quality, lasts forever. Another one is this mop brush, also made by Raphael. Good medium-sized mop brush, and it basically can do most things. Comes to also a nice point when you have a bit of detail, and also holds a lot of water and can produce a good wash, especially for something around an A4 size. If you're using a larger piece of paper, you may need a bigger mop brush. For smaller shapes, I like this little Winsor & Newton. This is a sable brush, and particularly when I'm doing sketches in a small notebook or travel journal, this comes in handy. And this rigger brush, always have a rigger brush for those telephone poles and lines and rigging. It is very handy for that sort of little calligraphy. But most of the heavy lifting is done with these two brushes. As far as paint goes, it's good to use a good quality paint. Alright, you can imagine adding water to poor quality watercolor and you're going to end up with something that lacks a lot of punch. So if you're looking for best quality, one I can recommend is Daniel Smith. I've done a review on these. This is an Alvaro Castanet set. Beautiful color paints, really strong, and a little goes a long way. So I recommend those. If you're looking for excellent student paint, then I can recommend Maya Mary's Venezia colors. They come in little tubes like this and actually hold a lot of paint. So good value for money and good strong pigment as well. I mostly use tube colors for watercolor as opposed to pans. Pans are handy obviously for traveling and you want that little set of paints handy. But in the studio or for larger works, tubes work the best. Okay, paper, you've got to paint on something, and I pretty much paint on one type of paper, and that is cold press 300 gram paper. And I like Fabriano. This is one of their watercolor blocks, and the paper is actually held together on the sides with a gum, so you don't have to worry about the paper buckling or having to stretch the paper. Once the painting is dry, you simply cut it out and take it out and you're good to go. What's great about cold press paper, it's got some tooth to it, but it's not too rough either. So you can get that scumbled, speckled light effect if you drag your brush across it quickly, but it also has just enough smoothness for details or flat areas as well. A nice addition is one of these notebooks, also Fabriano. It's got 300 gram paper in it and you can do your work in it, and it's really just such a pleasure to have one of these handy. 300 gram as well, cold press. For mixing color and working on your palette, these little plastic trays are ideal. They're cheap, they don't break, and easy to transport. You can see I don't wash them either. Just wet them, put your mix on. These little dirty trays over here, add some water, and you can get some good grays as well. As long as they're warm and cool, they'll probably work just fine. That's really about it. The other thing I like is to get good strong color in my paintings, and watercolor is no exception. Start off with a good amount of color on your first wash. Let that dry a bit, then work the values over that. Add some more color, keep things wet and loose. And that's really about it. But I'm going to show you something now that gives you an idea of how I like to go about doing a watercolor painting. This is the scene I'm going to paint, and just drawing that very loosely into my sketchbook. And this is the Fabriano sketchbook with 300 gram watercolor paper. I'm going to add a few figures as well, just for a bit of scale and interest. Dropping in some color now, mostly cobalt blue, and putting that in the sea as well. Bit of alizarin crimson for the beach head at the top there. And reserving some of these whites where I want the waves to go. Using a little bit of tissue paper for that. A little bit more alizarin crimson for the sunny part of the beach, and then dropping in some shadows. This is ultramarine and a bit of red. Going to let that dry a bit, and then come in with some more clean color, mostly cobalt blue in this case. I'm using the cobalt blue from Daniel Smith, which is a very powerful color. Some more alizarin crimson, and getting some darks into that beach head there, but still mostly color. Not working on values quite yet. And some viridian mixed with the blue for the darks in the sea, leaving a little bit of white on the distant headland there for a suggestion of waves. And just throwing in more color, getting it nice and strong. Lightening up as it gets to the beach by just adding a little bit more water. And then I'm going to try and get the shape of those waves and come back to them later, finish them off in the final pass. Bit of yellow on the sunny part of the beach. Bit of yellow and alizarin crimson, and drop in a few more washes of richer color now into the darks in the foreground, which are the rocks. And these are made up ultramarine, burnt sienna, a little bit of alizarin, some more cobalt blue, and then work in the blue shadows. Keep a distinction between rocks and shadows, and try and add all the darks while the paint is still wet. If you wait for the paint to dry, you'll end up with very hard edged shapes. So I'll let the watercolor settle, and it looks a little better after a while. Dropping in some green as well on the shadow side of those rocks. So I like the shadows to be colorful, rich and deep, and you can see into them. Makes it more interesting. And then some simple figures and some shadows just to tie them down to the beach surface. And now I've got to think about these waves, and the only way to really do that is bring in some gouache, some white gouache paint, or Chinese white sometimes called, and drag that in, still working wet into wet. Try not to use too much of it, but invariably I probably do. You can always go over it again. Just deepening some of that color again. I like rich watercolor, and I think we've got a nice little sketch here. It's just a basic watercolor sketch for you to try out. Well, I hope you got a few interesting tips and useful painting advice in this video. I'm preparing a watercolor course for beginners at the moment, so if you don't want to miss that, make sure you've subscribed to my free painting course. You'll see a link up here or below this video. And once you've signed up there, not only do you get a free course, but you'll be notified and one of the first people to know about the launch of the watercolor course. Well, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you can subscribe, that would be great. And I will see you in the next video soon. Until then, cheers for now.